I've always believed that family comes first. At least, that's what my parents drilled into me growing up. I'm Ashley, 32, working in marketing for a tech company in Denver. I bought my apartment 5 years ago, stretching myself financially but determined to have a place to call my own. The mortgage payments were steep, but I managed. Last month, everything changed when I got promoted to senior marketing manager. The salary bump was substantial, like almost 40% more than what I was making before. When the HR director told me the number, I had to ask her to repeat it to make sure I hadn't misheard. The first thing that popped into my mind wasn't a vacation or a shopping spree. It was my mortgage. With this kind of money, I could pay it off years ahead of schedule. The thought of being debt-free, of truly owning my place, was intoxicating. I couldn't wait to share the news with my family. My parents have always been proud of me, or so I thought. My younger sister Megan recently got married to Kyle, a guy who works in finance but somehow always seems to be between big opportunities. I'd helped them with their wedding expenses last year. It wasn't a small amount either, but I wanted Megan to have her perfect day. Every month, I'd also been transferring $600 to my parents' account for their utilities. Dad retired early due to back problems, and Mom's part-time job at the library doesn't bring in much. I never complained about it. That's what family is for, right? I invited everyone over to my parents' house for dinner to share my good news. Mom made her famous pot roast, Dad opened a bottle of wine, and Megan and Kyle showed up dressed like they were heading to a fancy restaurant afterward. I got promoted, I announced after we'd all settled at the table, senior marketing manager. That's wonderful, honey, Mom said, serving me an extra-large portion of mashed potatoes. How much more are they paying you? I told them the figure, and their eyes widened. Well, that's fantastic, Dad said, raising his glass, to Ashley's success. Everyone clinked glasses, and for a moment, I felt on top of the world. So, I've been thinking about what to do with the extra money, I continued, excited to share my plan. I'm going to put almost all of it toward my mortgage. If I'm aggressive about it, I could be completely debt-free in about 18 months. The silence that followed was weird. Mom and Dad exchanged glances. Megan put down her fork. Is that really the best use of your money? Mom finally asked. What do you mean? I was confused. Dad cleared his throat. Well, honey, you're already making your payments on time. There's no rush to pay it all off now. Yeah, Megan chimed in, twirling her wedding ring. Actually, Kyle and I have been struggling with our rent lately. His commission structure changed, and things are tight. It would really help if you could chip in a bit each month. I stared at my sister, not sure I'd heard her correctly. You want me to help pay your rent? Just temporarily, Kyle said smoothly, until things pick up again. And your father and I, Mom added, we've been thinking about replacing our car. The repair bills keep adding up, and with a little help from you. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Wait, let me get this straight. I just told you I got a promotion, and your first thought is how my money can benefit you. Don't be selfish, Ashley, Megan said sharply, that's what family does, we help each other. I already help, my voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. I send Mom and Dad $600 every month for utilities. I gave you and Kyle $10,000 for your wedding last year. How is that being selfish? That wedding money was a gift, Megan said dismissively, and the utility money is just basic support for our parents. We're talking about new needs now. I took a deep breath. Look, I appreciate that everyone has needs, but I have goals too. I've been dreaming about paying off my mortgage early, and now I finally have the chance to do it. So your apartment is more important than your family? Dad asked, his voice tinged with disappointment. That's not what I'm saying, I replied, feeling my cheeks flush. I'm saying I need to take care of my financial security too. Once my mortgage is paid off, I'll have even more flexibility to help out if needed. Mom sighed dramatically. I guess we know where we stand then. The rest of the dinner was excruciating. Conversation was minimal, with pointed silences and thinly veiled looks of disapproval directed my way. Even the pot roast, usually my favorite, tasted like cardboard. As I drove home that night, I felt a mixture of guilt and resentment. Was I being selfish? Was it wrong to want financial freedom before taking on more family obligations? The voices in my head argued back and forth, but deep down, I knew I had to stick to my plan. This was my future at stake. 3 months after that uncomfortable dinner, I was making serious progress on my mortgage. Each time I made an extra payment, I felt a small thrill of accomplishment. My family situation, however, was another story entirely. The calls from my parents had become predictable. "Ashley, the water heater is acting up," or "your father needs new prescription glasses." Megan was worse, texting me at least twice a week with various financial emergencies. After her demotion at work, something about missing deadlines, she and Kyle were apparently struggling to make ends meet. I always sent the money. Part of me felt obligated, while another part hoped that my generosity would eventually be acknowledged. It never was. The thank yous became briefer, the requests more frequent, as if my assistance was now expected rather than appreciated. One Tuesday evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Megan: "My birthday party this Saturday at Kyle's mom's house, 6 p.m., bring a nice gift. Address, 1542, Oakwood Lane." I figured this might be a chance to mend fences, especially since I hadn't met much of Kyle's family. Our only meeting was at Megan's wedding a year ago. His mother, Barbara, had a reputation for being particular, Megan's diplomatic way of saying she was judgmental and controlling. I spent my lunch break that Friday shopping for Megan's gift, a designer handbag she'd been eyeing for months. It cost nearly $500, but I wanted to make a good impression and show there were no hard feelings. Saturday arrived, and I pulled up to a large colonial-style house in an upscale neighborhood. Cars lined the street, suggesting a bigger gathering than I'd anticipated. Clutching the gift bag, I rang the doorbell. A stern-faced woman in her 60s opened the door. "You must be Ashley," she said, looking me up and down, "Megan's sister." "Yes, that's me. Nice to see you again, Barbara." She nodded curtly and led me into a living room crowded with people. I spotted my parents chatting with a couple I didn't recognize, and Megan surrounded by friends. Kyle stood nearby with his father and sister. I had barely taken 3 steps into the room when Barbara's voice rang out, loud enough for several nearby conversations to halt. "So, Ashley, I've been meaning to ask you something," she said. "Why do you refuse to help your sister financially when you clearly have the means to do so?" The room grew quiet. I felt my face flush hot with embarrassment and confusion. "I'm sorry, what?" I managed to say. "Megan tells me you got a big promotion," Barbara continued, her voice carrying across the room. "Yet she and Kyle are struggling to pay rent, and you won't help. I find that interesting." I glanced at Megan, who was suddenly very interested in her phone. "I do help Megan," I said carefully. "I've sent her money multiple times over the past few months." Barbara scoffed, "Pocket change. You could easily cover their entire rent if you wanted to. But instead, you're hoarding your money to pay off your own apartment ahead of schedule. Very selfish behavior." I felt like I'd been slapped. Looking around the room, I saw my parents staring at the floor, refusing to make eye contact with me. Several guests were whispering to each other. I wanted nothing more than to turn around and leave. As if sensing my thoughts, Megan suddenly appeared at my side, grabbing my arm. "Please don't go," she whispered urgently, "it'll just make things worse. People will ask questions." My parents hurried over as well. "Stay, Ashley," Mom hissed, "don't make a scene." So I stayed, swallowing my hurt and anger. The dinner that followed was excruciating. I sat silently while Megan opened gifts and received congratulations. When it was my turn, I handed her the expensive handbag, forcing a smile. "Oh, how nice," Barbara commented loudly, "though I know you earn enough to have bought her something truly special." Several guests nodded in agreement. My parents exchanged glances and nodded too, their silent betrayal cutting deeper than Barbara's words. Megan sighed dramatically. "Not everyone understands the importance of family helping family," she said, glancing meaningfully in my direction. I sat there, stunned by their collective audacity. For the next hour, I picked up my food and spoke only when directly addressed. As soon as I could do so without drawing attention, I slipped out the front door without saying goodbye to anyone. On the drive home, tears of anger and hurt blurred my vision. Days passed with no apology from anyone. Not Megan, not my parents, certainly not Barbara. It was as if the entire humiliating experience had never happened, except that it had, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. The following Sunday, my parents invited me over for their usual family dinner. I nearly declined but decided this was an opportunity to clear the air. Megan would be there too, Mom mentioned. I arrived to find Megan and Kyle already seated at the table. My father was carving a roast chicken while my mother brought in side dishes. The normalcy of the scene was jarring after what had transpired at the birthday party. After some awkward small talk about work and weather, I couldn't take it anymore. I think we need to talk about what happened at Megan's birthday, I said, setting down my fork. The table went silent. What do you mean? Megan asked innocently. I mean how Barbara publicly humiliated me, accused me of not helping you financially, and no one, not one of you, stood up for me. Megan gasped, Don't you dare insult my mother-in-law. Barbara was just telling the truth. You are selfish, Ashley. Kyle nodded, My mother sees through your act. You only care about yourself and your stupid apartment. I turned to my parents, hoping for support, but they looked uncomfortable rather than indignant on my behalf. Well, honey, Mom began hesitantly, you have been rather focused on your mortgage lately. And less focused on your family obligations, Dad finished. I stared at them, these people who had raised me, who I thought would always have my back. In that moment, I realized a painful truth. They saw me as a resource, not as a daughter or sister who deserved respect and support. I think I need a break, I said, standing up, from all of you. The next few months passed in a blur of work and mortgage payments. I'd stuck to my plan, making extra payments whenever possible. With each month, the balance dropped significantly, and I could finally see the light at the end of the tunnel. My relationship with my family remained distant. I still sent my parents their monthly $600 for utilities, and I'd help Megan with smaller amounts when she asked, but our interactions were brief and businesslike. No more Sunday dinners, no more long phone calls with my mom. Then, one ordinary Tuesday morning, I received the email I'd been working toward for so long, mortgage payment confirmation, final payment processed. I stared at my computer screen, barely believing it. With my latest payment, my mortgage was completely paid off. My apartment, all 1,100 square feet of it, was truly mine. No more debt. No more monthly payments. Just freedom. I wanted to celebrate this milestone, and despite everything, my first thought was to share it with my family. Maybe this could be a fresh start for us. I called an upscale restaurant downtown and made a reservation for Saturday night. Hi Mom, I said when she answered the phone. I have some good news I'd like to celebrate. I paid off my mortgage. Oh, that's wonderful, honey, she said, sounding genuinely pleased for the first time in months. I'd like to take you and Dad to dinner on Saturday to celebrate. At Giovanni's downtown. And Mom? Could you let Megan and Kyle know they're invited too? There was a pause. Sure, I'll tell them. Saturday arrived, and I got to the restaurant early, feeling excited and a bit nervous. The hostess led me to a large table in a quiet corner, perfect for our family celebration. I ordered a bottle of champagne and waited. My parents arrived first, both dressed up for the occasion. We exchanged slightly awkward hugs, but their smiles seemed sincere. Then the restaurant door opened again, and I froze. It wasn't just Megan and Kyle walking in, it was an entire entourage. Behind them were Kyle's parents, Barbara and Richard, followed by a woman who looked like Kyle's sister, her husband, and 3 children ranging from about 5 to 10 years old. Megan approached our table with a bright smile, as if bringing 7 unexpected guests to my celebration dinner was perfectly normal. Hope you don't mind the extras, she said casually, this is my family now, so I figured they should be here too. I sat there speechless as Kyle's sister corralled the waitstaff to rearrange tables to accommodate everyone. Barbara gave me a curt nod but didn't bother with a greeting. Since Ashley's paid off her mortgage, Megan announced to the group, she can afford to be more generous now. So everyone, order whatever you want, the most expensive dishes on the menu. The children cheered, and everyone started eagerly scanning the menu, pointing out truffle-infused dishes and premium steaks. I sat there, stunned by their audacity. My parents were studying their menus too, not meeting my eyes. Were they in on this? Something inside me shifted. Maybe it was watching Barbara smugly order a $120 bottle of wine for her side of the table. Maybe it was seeing Kyle's niece demand the restaurant's priciest seafood platter. Or maybe it was just months of built-up resentment finally reaching its breaking point. I excused myself, saying I needed to use the restroom. Instead, I found our server and pulled her aside. I'd like to modify my reservation, I said quietly. Could you please prepare separate bills for each party? I'll pay for myself and the table reservation fee, but everyone else will need to cover their own orders. The server looked a bit surprised but nodded, of course, ma'am. When I returned to the table, everyone was chatting and ordering appetizers without a care in the world. I plastered on a smile and sat through toast after toast, each one thinly disguised criticism. To Ashley, Kyle's father said, raising his glass, who can finally stop being so thrifty now that her mortgage is paid off. To my sister, Megan added, who will hopefully realize that family deserves her generosity more than a bank. My parents chuckled at these jokes, nodding along as if they were harmless teasing rather than blatant attempts to guilt me into paying for more things. I saw my family through new eyes that night. Dinner progressed, with everyone ordering multiple courses and expensive drinks. The children spilled sodas that had to be replaced and demanded desserts they barely touched. I calculated that the bill must be approaching several $1,000s. Finally, as coffee was being served, the moment of truth arrived. The server appeared with a stack of separate checks, which she began distributing around the table. There must be a mistake, my father said immediately. This should all be on one bill, my daughter is treating us tonight. The server looked at me questioningly. Actually, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, I asked for separate checks. I'm paying for my meal and the table reservation fee, but everyone else is responsible for their own orders. The shocked silence that followed was almost worth the months of frustration. This is outrageous, Barbara was the first to recover, you invited us to dinner. Actually, I invited my parents, Megan, and Kyle, I corrected her. Everyone else invited themselves. And it was Megan who suggested ordering the most expensive items, not me. But this bill is over $500 just for me and Richard, Barbara sputtered. Kyle's sister looked panic-stricken as she stared at her family's bill, which included all the children's orders. This isn't fair, Megan cried out, you know we're struggling financially. And yet you ordered the $75 steak and two $18 cocktails, I pointed out calmly. I took out my credit card and handed it to the server along with my individual check, I'm all set. Ashley, you can't do this, my mother hissed, her face red with embarrassment. Actually, I can, and I am. I stood up, turned to the server, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, please make sure they all pay their bills, don't let anyone leave without paying. I walked out of the restaurant to a chorus of angry protests and desperate pleas. My phone started buzzing with texts before I even reached my car, but I ignored them all. Back home, I turned off my phone and slept better than I had in months. When I woke up the next morning and finally checked my messages, there were dozens of missed calls and angry texts demanding I return to the restaurant and pay the bills, apparently totaling about $3,000. The pounding on my door started around noon the next day. Through the peephole, I could see my parents and Megan standing in the hallway. They looked furious. Part of me wanted to pretend I wasn't home, but I knew this confrontation was inevitable. I took a deep breath and opened the door. They didn't wait for an invitation. All three pushed past me into my living room, their faces red with anger. How could you? Megan shrieked. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? My father pointed his finger at me. $3,000, Ashley, that's what you stuck us with last night, $3,000. We had to put it on our credit card, my mother added. We'll be paying interest on that for months. I crossed my arms and leaned against the wall, and whose fault is that? I invited 4 people to dinner, 11 showed up. They're my family, Megan shouted. Kyle's parents wanted to celebrate with you. No, they wanted a free meal, I corrected her. Just like they've wanted free money from me all along, just like all of you have. That's not fair, my father protested. Isn't it? I raised an eyebrow. Mom, Dad, when was the last time you called me just to chat? To ask how I'm doing? It's always about money, always about what I can give you. That's what family does, my mother insisted, we help each other. Funny, it seems like I'm the only one doing the helping. I walked to my desk and pulled out a folder. I've kept track, you know. In the past year, I've given you 2 over $10,000, not counting the monthly utility payments. And Megan, I've given you nearly $15,000, including your wedding contribution. They stared at me in silence. And it's never enough, is it? I continued. I pay for your utilities, and you want a new car, I help with Megan's wedding, and suddenly I'm expected to pay her rent too. I invite you to celebrate my accomplishment, and you bring an entire extended family to cash in. You're twisting everything, Megan cried, we're struggling. Kyle's job isn't stable, and my pay got cut. Meanwhile, you're sitting pretty in your paid-off apartment. An apartment I worked my ass off to pay for, I shot back, no one handed me anything. I earned every dollar, saved where I could, and made smart financial decisions. All while continuing to help you. And now you need to help again, my father said. You need to reimburse us for last night and apologize to everyone, especially Barbara and Richard. I actually laughed at that. Apologize? To the woman who's done nothing but insult me? To the family who crashed my celebration and ordered the most expensive items on the menu deliberately? No, that's not happening. So you're just going to leave us drowning in debt? Megan's voice rose to a shriek again. You created that debt, not me, I replied calmly. And speaking of debts, I've made a decision, I won't be sending the monthly $600 for utilities anymore. And Megan, no more financial bailouts for you either. The shock on their faces would have been comical if the situation weren't so sad. You can't do that, my mother gasped. I can, and I am. I walked to the door and held it open. I think it's time for you to leave. We're not going anywhere until you agree to pay us back. Megan planted herself firmly on my couch. Either you leave willingly, or I call the police and report trespassers in my home, I said, pulling out my phone. Your choice. After they left, I sat down and blocked their numbers on my phone. Then I poured myself a glass of wine and toasted to my new beginning, one without financial manipulation from the people who should have been my biggest supporters. The next 2 months were surprisingly peaceful. I occasionally heard through mutual friends that my parents and Megan were spreading rumors about me, calling me selfish, greedy, a terrible daughter and sister. It stung at first, but I realized their opinions no longer held power over me. I redirected the money I used to give my family into investments and a travel fund. I took a solo trip to Portugal, something I'd always wanted to do but had put off due to family obligations and mortgage payments. I started dating again, joined a hiking club, and even began volunteering at a financial literacy program for young adults. One evening, as I was walking home from a volunteer session, I ran into my mother's friend Susan at the grocery store. Ashley, it's been ages, she said, giving me a hug. I hear things are strained with your family right now. I nodded, bracing myself for a lecture about family loyalty. Instead, Susan surprised me. Your mother tells everyone you abandoned them, but I've known your parents for 30 years. They've always expected others to solve their problems. She squeezed my arm. Good for you for setting boundaries. That brief encounter was validation I hadn't realized I needed. Other people could see the dynamic for what it was, not a selfish daughter, but a family that had grown accustomed to exploiting my generosity. A week later, I received a letter from Megan, not an email or text, but an actual handwritten letter. For a moment, I considered throwing it away unopened. But curiosity won out. Ashley, it began, Kyle and I are getting divorced. His mother convinced him I'm not good enough for their family. The irony isn't lost on me. I've been thinking about how I treated you, how we all treated you. I won't ask for money, but I would like to talk someday, Megan. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. Maybe someday we could rebuild our relationship, but it would have to be one based on mutual respect, not financial dependence. As for my parents, I heard they'd downsized to a smaller house, something they could actually afford on their income. Part of me felt guilty, but a larger part felt relieved. They were finally taking responsibility for their own finances.